A good evening. How are you? You can wish me Mazel Tov. I wish you Mazel Tov. Nina and I are just coming from a wedding, a beautiful chuppah. There was so much joy there. All the guests wish each other Mazel Tov. It's not just that you say Mazel Tov to the bride and groom and their parents and their family. You say Mazel Tov to everybody who was at the wedding. So much joy. So Mazel Tov to you. You're connected to that wedding through us. That was Yehuda Green. We're working our way through his album during the opening, the countdown timer, Land of Your Soul, and that one's called Mizbeach Hadash, a new altar. Who is with us as we open Tractate Tainus, a new tractate, the 10th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of public fasts as they were decreed in the ancient world. Very, very interesting. There's going to be a lot of digressions and unexpected wisdom that we encounter in this beautiful, beautiful tractate. Who is with us as we get it going on a Sunday night? Paula in Chicago, Yehudit in South Carolina, John in Maine, Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, Jose in Miami Lakes, Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Missouri, Lucy in West Virginia, Paul in the Great Northwest, Christo in Lubbock, Dorothy in PA, Heather in Kansas, Helena in Finland is with us from across the pond. Welcome. Paula says, dance. I love it. Bill says 10,000 blessings. Everyone's saying Mazel Tov. Beautiful, 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 fantastic. All these Mazel Tov. Steve in Tallahassee, over there on the YouTube side. Aoife in Florida. Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. Okay. What was I going to share from the wedding? I mean, it was really special. I'll just mention a little bit. So it was a Hasidic wedding, and interesting in that as well. So Rabbi Wolf, a very dear friend of ours, Rabbi Reuven Wolf, actually has a very large online following. You can find him on YouTube, Rabbi Reuven Wolf. And when I've gone and, live from Rosh Hodesh, singing the Hallel of Rosh Hodesh, that's from his synagogue, Mayan Yisrael, and it was his daughter getting married. So Rabbi Wolf grew up a Stutziner Chassid. So that's one of there's many branches of Hasidic Judaism, many dynasties that were established. So the Stutziners wear a shtreimel, the big round fur hat. But Rabbi Wolf, when he was a teenager, I think when he was 17 years old, he was looking for something a little bit different than his tradition, and he ended up a disciple of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he kind of is Chabad oriented, even though he still wears the shtreimel. Chabad Hasidim don't wear the shtreimel; they wear a hat much like this one. And the Kala, the bride's family, is Chabad, and I think kind of with some Russian flavor, Chabad. And Rabbi Wolf's wife, from me, she's also from a different Hasidic dynasty. They wear the shtreimel. I don't know if they're Stuchin or some other. But something that you'll find definitely at any Hasidic wedding is this sense that there's tremendous joy. It's a big party. Absolutely, like any wedding that you're accustomed to. And like any wedding you may have been to, that is held in a house of worship. I mean, there's a real sacred vibe going on there. And this idea that what's happening is not just that a boy and a girl are getting married and they're pledging to be there for each other, through thick and thin for the rest of their lives, and that the families are being joined into a greater family, but also this tremendous sense of mission and purpose. And the boy was teaching Torah literally up until as soon as he finished giving over a lesson of Torah, which he was very deeply involved in giving over. And the moment he finished, we got up from the room where he was teaching. We all accompanied the groom, to meet the bride, put the veil on her, and then out to the chuppah, right? So it's not like he's wandering in a little bit hungover from his bachelor party and stumbling up to the altar, as it were. but rather, from being very engaged in teaching Torah and sort of symbolically pledging himself, right, to be a student and a disciple and someone who submits to God and is going to have and he and the girl are committing that their marriage, everything that comes out of that marriage, the children, the learning, the dinners, the obligations, the privileges, all of it is imbued with sanctity, right? They're here on earth. They are souls that are here on earth to fulfill a holy mission, and they're praying right at the time of their wedding, that whole life that they're going to have together will be invested with sanctity, and that the new souls that will come from it, God willing, will come from a holy place. And so those children should grow to a life of Torah, chuppah, and masim tovim, right? Torah, a Jewish wedding, and good deeds. And that's what we wish for everybody at a wedding. I wanted to share that with you. Okay. Let's get into our new tractate, Tainus. Tainus itself, some would say Tanit, means fast, to fast, as in having a fast, but not like the fast of Yom Kippur or Tisha B'Av, commemorating events in the past, or Tisha B'Av, or fulfilling the obligation of afflicting oneself on Yom Kippur. But these are the decreed fasts. Now, the fast would be decreed in the ancient world in response to very negative circumstances, often drought, right? So in a very agricultural society, if the rain doesn't come by a certain time, it's like everybody is going to be in trouble. And there was this, basic understanding that at least within the Holy Land of Israel, that the people were living at this spiritual level where if their level falls, one of the consequences of that could be that, God restrains the rain, as it were, to send a message, people, you got to behave better. And so they would say, they would take the lesson to heart and say, we need to, buckle down and pray. It was a fast to sort of afflict themselves, but really to say to themselves, we're not behaving right. Let us stop. Don't even eat. Focus on what's really important. See what our shortcomings are as a community. It's not that, you fast as an individual. These were communal, public fasts. And one of the reasons would be lack of rain. Another could be a plague. Another could be persecution, from the evil empire, as it were, generally Rome in those days. And they would decree a fast. Now we're going to start on our page today, not by talking about fasting at all, but actually by defining the rainy season and when it begins and when we begin to pray for rain, when our prayer changes at a certain time of year and we start praying for rain in our daily prayers. Why would we start a volume on public fasts with defining when is the rainy season? Because you need to know when is the rain late, that you should start to worry that things are not good praying for the rain. Now, this tractate is relatively short. Tainus, the 10th volume of the Talmud, consists of 4 chapters, 30 pages. Just a quick overview of the 4 chapters. Chapter 1 focuses on rainfall, the common dates for the various rainfalls of the year, the significance of rain in general, and the order of the cycles of fasts for rainfall. Chapter 2 addresses the special prayers and customs of fast days, especially those of the major communal fasts. Chapter 3 contains a broad discussion of the events for which fasts are decreed. This chapter focuses on the misfortunes mentioned in the previous chapters, as well as other calamities of various kinds. And chapter 4 primarily addresses days on which fasting is prohibited, due to the fact that those days have been established as permanent days of rejoicing, right? We saw that what was it called? The Megillus Tainus, I think it was called. And that was the first written part of the oral law. And the idea was that these are days that had been decreed days of joy by the sages in earlier generations, and therefore you couldn't decree a fast day on those days. right? So chapter 4 primarily addresses days on which fasting is prohibited due to the fact that those days have been established as permanent days of rejoicing. It also discusses certain fixed communal fasts in memory of general disasters that befell the Jewish people, like Tisha B'Av, like Gimel Tishrei, days on which something terrible happened, and then the sages decreed a fast day, and we're still observing those fasts, although when Mashiach comes, I believe those fasts, yes, will be turned into days of rejoicing. So, let's light up the darkness. Thank you for catching me, pointing it out to Nina, and sending her in to alert me. L'chaim. I've already said a bracha. That's lemonade with seltzer. Do you know that the lemonade you buy in the store, this glass, I put that much lemonade and that much seltzer, and it still tastes pretty sweet. I mean, we've just gotten to a place in this country where the standard beverage is so packed with sugar, it's ridiculous. That's my own little pet peeve. Okay. We begin. Tainus, page 2, chapter 1, Mishnah number 1. From when, i.e., from which date, does one begin to mention the might of the rains by inserting the phrase Mashiv haruach umorid hageshem? He makes the wind blow and causes the rain to fall. From when do we start inserting that in the second blessing of the prayer, the Amidah, the standing prayer that we say 3 times a day? From when in the calendar do we change it, right? It changes. Every 6 months it changes. So just prior to the winter season, which is when in Israel the rains will come, we start to say in the second blessing of the Amidah, as we're blessing God, in that second blessing of the Amidah is generally about the resurrection of the dead, or at least that's what it ends on. But within that blessing, we insert the words, he makes the wind blow and the rain fall. And then the other 6 months of the year, we say he causes the dew to fall. That's in Sephardic, I believe, and definitely Hasidic communities and Ashkenazic communities. They just don't say anything about the weather in that second blessing. But the other 6 months, he causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. When does that 6-month period of the year begin is the question we're asking. Rabbi Eliezer says the phrase is inserted from the first festival day of the festival of Sukkot. Rabbi Yehoshua says from the last festival day of the festival of Sukkot. And of course the law is from the last day of Sukkot, which is Shmini Atzeret. On that day, in the Musaf Amidah, the additional prayer of that day, we begin to say Mashiv haruach umorid hageshem. And we'll say that until the first day of Passover. Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, now they're arguing, when should this start? When do we start saying that? On the first day of Sukkot or on the last day of Sukkot? So Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, since rain is nothing other than a sign of curse during the festival of Sukkot, as rainfall forces Jews to leave their sukkah. The sukkah, you can see the stars through the ceiling. It's certainly not going to keep the rain out. So if it rains while we're supposed to be eating and sleeping in our sukkah, we're forced out of the sukkah and back into our homes. So it's understood as a bad omen, a bad sign when it rains during Sukkot. We saw there was the metaphor given when we were learning that in Tractate Sukkah, that if it rains during Sukkot, it's like a servant brings a drink to his master and the master throws the drink in his face, right? It's God is angry with us when it rains at Sukkot. Was that understanding? According to the sages. So, since we don't want it to rain during Sukkot, why would we start praying for rain while it's still Sukkot? That's Rabbi Yehoshua's opinion. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, well, I too did not say that it is proper to request rain at this time during Sukkot, but it is proper only to mention the phrase, he makes the wind blow and the rain fall, in its due time. And Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, if so, i.e., if reciting the phrase does not constitute a request for rain, well, then one should always mention rain, even in the summer. If all we're saying is praising God as the one who brings rain at the appropriate times, why would we only say that during the rainy season? The fact is, we change the prayer during the rainy season because we want the rain to come, and therefore we wouldn't want to start praying for that while it's still Sukkot, when we don't really want the rain to come yet. We want it to start after Sukkot ends. And the Mishnah states a general principle. One requests rain only immediately preceding the rainy season. And Rabbi Yehuda says, with regard to the one who passes before the ark as prayer leader on the concluding festival day of the festival of Sukkot, in other words, the one who is leading the prayers on Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly, its own holiday, but the 8th day of Sukkot, the one who is the prayer leader, it is the last prayer leader, right? Not the one who leads the morning services before the Torah service, but the one who leads the additional Amidah, the Musaf Amidah, the last prayer leader of Shmini Atzeret. He is the one who mentions rain for the first time. Whereas the first prayer leader, the one doing the morning Amidah before the Torah service, does not mention the rain. And the opposite is the case at the conclusion of the period of mentioning the rain, which happens on the first day of Passover. Here, the first prayer leader, the one before the Torah service, mentions the rain for the last time. And then the later prayer leader, who leads the additional Amidah, he omits the prayer for rain for the first time of the year at that time, for the first time in 6 months. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara. The Gemara asks, where does the Tana of the Mishnah stand that he teaches from when? Meaning, the Mishnah's opening question indicates that it has already been established that there is an obligation to mention rain at this time of year. Right? The Mishnah starts by saying, from when do we start mentioning rain in our prayers? You might have thought that it would say, why do we pray for rain within our daily prayer? And having established the source for that, then we would define from when in the year we start doing it. But okay, that's taken as a given. But now the Gemara is asking, the Mishnah's opening question indicates that it has already been established that there is an obligation to mention rain at this time of year. Where is this obligation stated? And the Gemara answers, the Tana is standing there, i.e., he bases himself on a Mishnah in Brachus, the first volume of the Talmud, Brachus Blessings, as it teaches on page 33, side A of Brachus. One mentions the might of the rains and recites, he makes the wind blow and the rain fall in the second blessing of the Amidah and the blessing of the resurrection of the dead, amid the blessing of the resurrection of the dead. Which makes sense, right? When we're praising God as the one who resurrects the dead, generally we think about that, at the end of times, God will resurrect the dead. He will bring back the dead. But it is also God who heals and brings back people from the brink of death. And God who sends the rain in the rainy season, right, is sort of that is the water that is going to make possible the rebirth of, our plant life in spring, from which we're all going to eat for the coming year. So it makes sense to put it there. Where am I? And the request for rain, and grant dew and rain as a blessing, is recited in the 9th blessing of the Amidah, the blessing of the years. So that's another adjustment that we make in the daily prayers. We add who causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall in the 2nd blessing of the 18, really 19. But in the 9th blessing, which we say 3 times a day, which I'll read in English, bless for us, Lord our God, this year and all the varieties of its produce for good. Bestow, in summer we say blessing. Bestow blessing upon the face of the earth. In winter we say bestow dew and rain for blessing upon the face of the earth. So again, we make a change for the rainy season. However, this change is not made at Shmini Atzeret, which precedes the rainy season. It's actually made a little bit later. We're going to be making it relatively soon. This is fascinating. We change from, so we say this in English, right? Barech Aleinu Hashem Elokeinu es Hashana Hazos, right? Bless for us, Lord our God, this year and all the varieties of its produce. Ve'es kol minei tevuasa letoiva v'sein bracha, right? That's in summer and grant blessing, or v'sein tal umatar livracha, right? Dew and rain for a blessing. That's in winter. When do we make that change from the summer formulation to the winter formulation? On December 5th. Haven't we spent so much time together talking about the Hebrew calendar, the lunar months, and the fact that to make the Hebrew calendar square with the 365-day solar year, it's so odd. There's going to be 7 leap years in every 19 years, so it's every 2 or 3 years we add a whole other month to the Hebrew calendar, right? And this time of year right now we're in Kislev, the month of miracles, which contains Hanukkah, and sometimes it starts in November and sometimes it starts in December, and the month, the lunar year just shifts so much, so many days, and we're always complaining that the holidays are coming very early or they're coming very late. Somehow the holidays are never on time. They're either early or late. And now I'm telling you that is baked into the Jewish prayer book, into the Hebrew prayer book, that we make a change in our daily prayers on December 5th. How is that possible? Because when we're talking about the rainy season and when it's going to start, we're not talking about an approximation, which is when we're making a change on Shmini Atzeres. That could come early, that could come late. But this particular change is tied directly to the solar year, and we start saying it a certain number of days before the winter solstice, and that's the way it's done. How that is actually derived in the math of it, the astronomy, etc., is for another day. We're going to come to it later in our journey through the Talmud. But isn't it interesting that there is one aspect of Jewish observance that is 100% tied to the solar calendar, one and only one. And the request for rain, that God should grant dew and rain as a blessing, is recited in the 9th blessing of the Amidah, the blessing of the years, right? That blessing continues. Grant this year and all its varieties of produce for good, and bestow dew and rain for a blessing from December 5th on. Upon the face of the earth, satisfy us from our bounty. And that one we change back, not on the solar year. We change back to it on Erev Pesach, right? So right before Passover. Okay, so what am I saying? So the 9th blessing, satisfies from your bounty and bless our year like other good years for blessing, for you are a generous God who bestows goodness and blesses the years. Blessed are you, Lord, who blesses the years. Right? So you can hear why it would be a blessing tied to the solar year that would be included in that particular blessing. And the prayer of distinction, Havdalah, which separates between sacred and profane, is recited in the evening prayer following Shabbos and festivals, and it's recited in the 4th blessing of the Amidah, who graciously grants knowledge. We make Havdalah at the end of Shabbos, but we also have a blessing of Havdalah, of separating between sacred and profane, included in the 4th blessing of the Amidah that we say in the evening after Shabbos has ended. We make an alteration to the daily Amidah for the outgoing of Shabbos and the incoming of the new week. And we do that in the blessing that God grants us knowledge, that he gives us the ability to distinguish between sacred and profane. And it is based on that Mishna in Tractate Brachus, which establishes the obligation to request for rain, that this Mishna teaches from when does one begin to mention the might of the rains. In Tractate Brachus, we establish that we adjust the Amidah for certain things, for when Shabbos ends, for the granting of dew and rain on December 5th, and for blessing God as the one who causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall from Shmini Atzeres onward. And the Gemara asks, but if so, Let the Tana teach this law about when we make that change over there in Tractate Brachus, at the beginning of the order of Zerayim. That's a part of the Mishnah. What is different about this case that he left it until here toward the end of the order of Moed? Zerayim is the order of the Mishnah that contains brachas. Then we go in, and there's several other volumes of Mishnah that don't have Gemaras, and so they're not included in our Talmud journey, though there are other tractates of Mishnahs. Then we enter the order of the tractate Moed, which is about the calendar, right? From the second volume of the Talmud Bavli on, which was Shabbos, right? And then Erevin, and then Pesachim. We've been talking about the calendar. We've been talking about the holidays. So that's Moed. So they're asking why, if they mention that we change the prayers in the first order in Zerayim, seeds, why didn't we talk about when we make those changes back then? Why do we leave it till here, 10 volumes later? 10 volumes of Gemara later. In other words, if this issue is indeed a continuation of the Mishnah and Brachus, why did the Tana neglect it until Tractate Tanis? And the Gemara answers, rather, the Tana of the Mishnah interrupted a discussion from Tractate Rosh Hashanah. As we learned in a Mishnah there, in our last tractate, and on the festival of Sukkot, all creatures are judged for water, right? That was the subject in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, that 4 times a year the world is judged. One of those times is how much water is going to be received in the coming year. And so it does make sense to continue that discussion here. Since the Tana taught, and on the festival of Sukkot, all creatures are judged for water, meaning how much rain will fall, from which it can be inferred that one should request rain near the time of this judgment. He taught here, from when does one mention the might of the rains? The Gemara asks a question with regard to the language of the Mishnah. And let the Tana simply teach, from when does one mention the rains? What is the meaning of the phrase, the might of the rains? Rabbi Yochanan said, because the rains fall with might. The might of the rain displays God's power in the world. As it is stated, Job 9:10, who does great things beyond comprehension, marvels without number. And it is also written at Job 5:10, who gives rain upon the earth and sends water upon the fields. It's not just that God gives rain, it's that the weather, and we can think of big lightning storms, etc., really display the power of God in a way that becomes a little bit more tangible to us, who can so easily forget to feel gratitude toward God. Where am I? And the Gemara asks, from where may it be inferred that these verses indicate that rainfall is considered a mighty act of God? And Rabbah bar Shaila said, this is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the term comprehension here and the term comprehension from a passage that deals with the creation of the world. And Rabbah bar Shaila elaborates on this verbal analogy. It is written here in Isaiah, who does great things that are beyond comprehension. And it is written there with regard to the creation of the world, have you not known? Have you not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not grow faint or weary? His discernment is beyond comprehension. And this shows that both creation and rainfall are beyond human comprehension. And concerning the creation of the world, it is written elsewhere, Psalm 65, who sets firm the mountains with your strength, who is girded with might. Psalm 65:7. And from this verse, it can be inferred that rainfall, like the creation of the world, reflects God's might. So when we're talking about the rain, it is appropriate, and the wind, that is appropriate to say the might of the rain or the might of the wind, God's might. And the Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that rain must be mentioned specifically in the Amidah prayer, the standing prayer? And the Gemara answers, as it was taught in a Baraisa with regard to the verse, Deuteronomy 11:13, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart, which is the service of God that is performed in the heart. You must say that this is referring to prayer. And right afterward, the next verse, it is written, and I shall give the rain of your land in its due time, the early rain and the late rain. And this juxtaposition teaches that it is appropriate to request rain while engaged in the service of the heart, i.e., prayer. So it's from the middle paragraph of the Shema that we derive that it is appropriate for us to pray for rain. The Gemara cites related statements concerning the idea that rainfall provides evidence of God's might. Rabbi Yochanan said, there are three keys maintained in the hand of the Holy One, blessed be He, which were not transmitted to an intermediary, i.e., God tends to these matters himself. He doesn't send an angel to take care of these things. God is personally invested in, and they are the key of rain, the key of birth, and the key of the resurrection of the dead. And Rabbi Yochanan cites verses in support of his claim. The key of rain, as it is stated, the Lord will open for you his good treasure, the heavens, to give the rain of your land in its due time. That's Deuteronomy 28:12. And this indicates that rainfall is controlled by God himself. From where is it derived that the key of birth is maintained by God? As it is written, and God remembered Rachel and listened to her, and he opened her womb. Right? When a couple is having trouble conceiving, right? They address God directly. God is involved in this. And all of the matriarchs had trouble conceiving. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Leah, I guess, eventually Leah had some problems. In the beginning, she did not. But eventually she did. So all of the matriarchs at one point or another had trouble conceiving, and Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel had a lot of trouble. Right? They had to wait a long time. And we have a teaching elsewhere that why were they infertile? Because God desires the prayers of the righteous. Right? So sometimes we should kind of, when we're lacking something in this world and it's difficult for us, we should pray for it, and we should recognize that perhaps that very difficulty in our lives is to create that intimacy between ourselves and God when we will pray and pray and pray and beseech to God and come into intimacy with God, and then, God willing, eventually those prayers will be answered. And from where is it derived that the key of the resurrection of the dead is maintained by God personally, as it is written, and you shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves. That's Ezekiel 37:13. I am almost done what I'm going to cover today, so if you've got questions or comments, please get them in. In the West, in the land of Israel, they say, as opposed to the Jewish community in Babylonia, the key of livelihood is also in God's hand, parnasa, right? That the ability of a person to earn a living and to provide for the family, this also is something that God attends to personally, right? And so if we feel like we're not making enough of a living to provide properly for our family, that's definitely something to pray to God for. And the key of livelihood is also in God's hand, as it is written in Psalm 145:16. Posech es yadecha umasbia lechol chai ratzon. That's from the Ashrei prayer, Psalm 145. Very, very important verse. We're commanded when we recite that prayer, Psalm 145, we also say it 3 times a day, twice in the morning, once in the afternoon. And when we reach this verse, you open your hand and satisfy the need of every living thing. We have to focus on that line and say it with great intention and intensity. You open your hand and satisfy the needs of every living thing. Posech es yadecha umasbia lechol chai ratzon. And the Gemara asks, and what is the reason that Rabbi Yochanan did not consider this key of livelihood in his list? Rabbi Yochanan said 3 things, right? Rain, birth, and resurrection of the dead. Why didn't he include livelihood? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yochanan could have said to you, rain is the same as livelihood in this regard, as rain is indispensable to all livelihoods. Nevertheless, we have the practice to be a little bit more specific about that. And if you're earning a good living, you should pray that you could keep earning that good living, and that you should continue to have the ability to tithe, right? To give 10% of your earnings to charity, to good causes, making God your business partner, as it were. And so if you have that ability, you should pray that you continue to have that ability. And if you're hurting financially and you don't have enough, what to provide for your family, you should pray with great intensity about that, and prepare for that prayer to be answered, right? You should pray to have a large vessel so that you can catch all the abundance that God can send your way. God is absolutely unlimited, and it is perfectly okay to pray that you should earn a good living. It is good to pray for that. But the sages assume when you're saying that, because you're going to dedicate 10% to all the good that you can do in this world, to help the hungry, to help the people who need shelter, to help the people who need education, to help the people who need medical care. You've got to give away 10% of your net income, set it aside for charity, right? We always advise this, like just have a separate bank account. Every time you get income, put 10% of it right over into the charity account, and then that everything in that charity account is just waiting to be given away. You may not be rich, it might not be so much money in that account, but now you're in the position of a philanthropist choosing the good causes that are deserving of your largesse, and you should investigate who you're giving money to, and get involved in sort of at least keeping track of what you're giving to make sure that it is a worthy cause. Okay, let's go to questions and comments. Sharon, can you clarify for me what the difference is between tzom and tainus? Okay, so both mean fast, and we say like tzom Gedalia, right? So that's the fast of Gedalia, where we're commemorating, something very negative in history, right? That Gedalia was murdered on the 3rd of Tishrei, and so we have a fast on the 3rd day of the new year. On the other hand, we say Tainus Esther, right? So that was a fast that Esther decreed because it was a time of danger to the Jewish people, and it worked out great, right? The people fasted. She was able to petition King Achashverosh. And I'm not sure, so I don't know for sure what the exact difference is in the Hebrew terms here. But it seems to me that Tainus is these public fasts that are decreed. Some of them, remain in the calendar, like the fast of Esther. But generally, Tainus is not establishing a fast that goes on and on and on and on. It's a fast that you decree in a time of danger. And as we'll learn later in this tractate, it could be a series of fasts, right? Like you're praying for rain and then the rain doesn't come. It's not like you just fasted once. They're going to fast on a Monday and then on a Thursday and then on a Monday, and then they might have another series of fasts until that rain finally comes. And it's really a population examining its deeds that year. And Tainus refers to that. But whereas an established fast, that commemorates like the destruction of the temple, or a murder that happened in our history, etc., I think that is where we're usually going to use the term tzom. Sharon, we do acknowledge the proper times for rain every day in the second paragraph of the Shema. Exactly. And the second paragraph of the Amidah is called Gevura, strength. It acknowledges God's omnipotence over life and death, rain and drought. Exactly so. Bill, yeah, but we know when daylight savings time stops and starts from now until Congress changes it again, and you still see a massive statistical jump in anxiety attacks and heart attacks in the week following both those dates. My leap year ulcers are tamed by comparison. I guess commenting on, even though it's predictable and tied to the solar year, it still causes stress as people get to know it. Here, it's that little bit of stress of, am I going to say it right? Because you may have to repeat some or all of the prayer if you say it wrong. And I think the sages advise that when you get to this date in the calendar, you actually say Mashiva Ruach Umorida Geshem like 100 times until it becomes fluent off your tongue again, and you're just used to saying it, so you don't make mistakes. But typically, in our shul, when we are doing that silent Amida for the first few days, where it's going to have that new term in it, the prayer leader or the gabbai will give a klop on something right before we go into that prayer to remind you that something is up. And even though it's a silent prayer, a few people will call out Shiva Ruach Umorida Geshem to remind the other people around them that we've made that change. Christo, I recall that the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, does cover a lot of the Mishnas that Bavli doesn't cover. Exactly, just so. Right, and it's just an interesting thing. Like, one of the most famous books of the Mishna is Pirkei Avos, right? All the the ethics of the fathers, or the chapters of the fathers that have all those wonderful sayings, like you'll find on every email that I send. Who is wise? One who learns from every person, and that's Avos 4:1. There's no Gemara on that. So Pirkei Avos, such a famous book of Mishnah, is not included in the Talmud Bavli because there's no Gemara on that. Right? So if you're really going to study the oral tradition, you would do the Talmud to make sure you get all the Gemaras, and many of the Mishnahs are included within the Talmud, but you'd also want to do some of these books of Mishnayos that are not included in the Talmud. And Tom Beck, the whole purpose of the leap years is to ensure that Pesach never starts before the spring equinox, and Sukkot never starts before the fall equinox. Yeah, I mean, basically saying that if we didn't have it, the years would get completely out of whack, right? And we would have a spring holiday that could end up in the fall or in the winter. I mean, it could go completely off base. But by adding that month, right, in 7 out of every 19 years, we keep the spring holidays in the spring and the fall holidays in the fall, as Tom is pointing out. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time, for Tainus Daf Gimel, page 3. You should have a good vach. And in the merit of the wedding that we attended today, you should all have so much nachas from your children, and give nachas to your children. If you don't have children, then your friends and your family, right? You should get happiness from them, and you should give them happiness. And may we all feel that we're living in a state of mazal tov, right? Of good stars, that things are aligning for the good.